The world-renowned humanitarian and chef José Andrés and his volunteers at World Central Kitchen have served more than 300 million, listen to that number, 300 million meals in disaster zones around the world. Now he's released the World Central Kitchen Cookbook, Feeding Humanity, Feeding Hope. Chef José Andrés is here with us live. Chef, you know, I don't know how you have time for all of this. You're running your restaurants, you run World Central Kitchen, you're everywhere all at once. Where did the idea come from for this?
Well, just for the record, I barely run my own restaurants, but I don't run World Central Kitchen. I am one more volunteer. Yes, I was the founder. Yes, I go to many missions when I can free myself. But what I'm fascinated is that 14 years after we founded World Central Kitchen, just the organization keeps responding. I mean, right now we are in Ukraine. I mean, right now we are in Morocco. Just we finished Turkey. We were in Florida. We were in Maui. That's why I'm very proud, that this is an organization by people that they show up and bring a response when people need food and water. So why we did this book? This is not a recipe book, and this is not my book, even you see my name. This is the stories of the people.
Of the people.
The stories of the people that make it happen in the most difficult situations.
Yeah. And the thing that's amazing about it, World Central Kitchen, is you go to a disaster zone, a place where a tragedy has occurred, and you don't bring a menu from somewhere else. You do a menu based on what the people there would recognize as a taste of home. So even if their home is in rubble or underwater, you're giving them that flavor of the place where they're from. That's a challenge. How do you source the ingredients? How do you get the expertise?
The knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Of the land.
It's all the contrary. It's the easiest path. When you cook what the locals want, you do it because what ingredients you have in the middle of Puerto Rico? The local ingredients of Puerto Rico. People think like in emergencies, food is never around. It's all the contrary. Only you have to go find it. Why? Because everything is destroyed. A hurricane. You cannot call the company, hey, send me 1,000 pounds of chicken. Maybe you have to drive to find the company that have the chicken. The only thing that you do is you source for the people, the kitchens, the food, and you put it all together. And then the most important, you go find the people that need you because they cannot find you. Why? Because it's chaos.
Yeah. Well, as soon as they smell the food coming up, they're going to find you. I'm pretty sure about that.
So local food is the normal thing to do.
Yeah.
Because it's what the local people know how to cook. And it's also what people like.
Yeah.
They don't want our pity. They want our respect. In Haiti, I was making black beans 14 years ago. And the woman came to me and said, thank you for the beans, but we don't eat them this way. Here, the white boy trying to feed those amazing Haitian women. You know what we did? We cook them in the way they like it. This amazing black bean sauce.
I tried it last night.
Rice.
It was delicious.
Yeah. My friend, you see, by listening to the people will tell you what they need, what they want. This is the least we can do in those situations.
You let the culture and the tradition speak through the food. And speaking of smelling the food, as Tony mentioned, you brought some dishes for us, and one of them, iconic dish from Ukraine. Do you want to explain what you have for us today?
So this dish, many people, which are these kind of amazing dumplings.
Okay.
That usually they are stuffed with cheese, but then you'll find many other stuffings now. Very creative, mushrooms and other things. But you know, in Poland, you will know them as pierogis. Actually, that's one recipe that is technically not even in the book, but it's the future of what we are, because we are very present in Ukraine. This is one of the dishes we've been serving very often in the very cold nights in winter in Ukraine. Actually, I have it written here, the Ukrainian people, they call them vareniki. These dumplings, you will find them everywhere. That's home food for many Ukrainians in the middle of a war, near the front lines. You bring them vareniki, and for few minutes, you are lifting up their spirit.
Absolutely. Incredible. I mean, there's nothing like that home-cooked meal that reminds you of your family, of your home, when people may not even have one. This was such a collaboration. You even had Michelle Obama, the Duchess of Sussex contribute to this. How did that come about?
Well, you know, it takes a village to make things happen. And it's a lot of people over the last 14 years that they've been helping us in different ways to make the organization we are today. Not necessarily. Everybody always tells me, Jose, how we can help? Not only World Central Kitchen, but how can I help my community?
Yeah.
And I always tell everybody, just do whatever you feel comfortable. Whatever you feel your expertise can help. You can be tweeting, you can be helping us raise funds, you can show up as a volunteer. It's 1,000 ways we can all do that. So for me to have, obviously, the most important, the chefs, the cooks that are part of this book, who are the ones that in the worst moments, they show up to help feed their people. And then, obviously, people like Michelle Obama and others, that they've been helping us to spread the word of what World Central Kitchen.
And that's what you're doing. You're showing that in everyone's little way that everyone can make a difference. José Andrés, thank you so much. Gracias por estar aquí. Thank you for being here. Indeed.
We begin this hour with 60 Minutes correspondent Anderson Cooper and his new book about the Astors, a family that once had unlimited wealth, power, and ambition. The Astor family story begins in 1780s, when John Jacob Astor turned his fur trade into a real estate empire and became America's first multi-millionaire. The family reached the height of its influence during the Gilded Age, when Caroline Astor created the 400 and reinvented social hierarchies in the 1880s. The family's clout ended with philanthropist Brooke Astor's death in 2007. It was overshadowed by her son's conviction for swindling millions from her estate. Cooper details the family saga in Astor, the rise and fall of an American fortune. And Anderson Cooper, our good friend, joins us this morning. Good morning.
Thanks, nice to be here.
Hello, good friend.
So, Anderson, you wrote about your family, the rise and fall of your own family, the Vanderbilts, a couple of years ago. Why were you so interested in telling the story of the Astors? And we know that these families sort of crisscrossed each other.
Yes. Yeah, they were, I mean, there was a big competition between Caroline Astor and the Vanderbilts. Caroline Astor essentially controlled New York society at the time, had created the meaning of American society, and the Vanderbilts wanted into society. They were like the nouveau riche family, and Caroline Astor refused to admit them into society. But I find these, you know, we all hear the name Astor, we hear the name Vanderbilt, we hear the names of these quote-unquote great families, but the actual kind of lived experiences of the people in the families is really interesting to me, and how it's different from the inside looking out as it is from the outside looking in.
I love how you open the book, Anderson, because you're 11 or 13 and you're meeting Brooke Astor for the first time. You're with your mom, and you assume Brooke Astor, Gloria Vanderbilt, they must have been friends. Never assume, because you know what assume does, but I assume, oh, they must be friends. And it was very clear your mom was not necessarily a fan.
My mom was not a fan of Brooke Astor, that's true. We met in a restaurant, I was like 13 years old.
She was wearing a big fur coat.
My first thought upon meeting Brooke Astor, who at that point was a legendary figure in New York, had given away tens of millions of dollars to charities in New York City that she had inherited from her husband, Vincent Astor. And my first thought was, who is this little lady in a big fur coat? This little old lady in a big fur coat, not knowing that fur was actually the way the Astors had initially created their fortune.
I didn't know that either, and that's why it comes full circle, because they started with beaver trapping, and even that didn't go well with the family. I mean, the more you read about this family, the more you read, these guys were a little shady. Can you take it back to the fur trading?
A lot of these fortunes, obviously, were built by a singular figure early on. In the Vanderbilts, it was Commodore Vanderbilt, who at 11, started working on a ship, built an empire of steamships and an empire in railroads. John Jacob Astor's first fortune was made in beaver skins. And beaver fur was incredibly valuable. It was particularly in Europe.
Big business.
He monopolized the beaver trade. He went out into the wilderness, traded, mastered the trade, and then really did it in a ruthless way. I mean, he used alcohol as a method to get better deals with indigenous populations. The U.S. government actually tried to stop the sale of alcohol to indigenous populations in trading posts. Astor basically stopped the American government from doing that. He was pretty ruthless. Even to his own traders, he would kind of screw them over. They would have to buy all the beads and trinkets at exorbitant prices, and then they had a motivation to be ruthless in their business practices. So and he plowed all that money into New York real estate, and the Astors own much of the land that, around Times Square, right where we're sitting.
And their name is on so much still to this day, from the library to Astoria, Queens, to other
to a subway station.
To Astor Place.
Right, if you go to the Astor Place subway station, there are still beavers on ceramic plates on the walls, and that's in homage to the Astors.
So because the money was made in such a ruthless fashion, it's so interesting when the Astors begin to establish themselves in New York society, they get to write the rules for society.
Right.
And I'm fascinated to read that one of them is that you need to be 3 generations removed from the person who actually got dirty.
From the unpleasant making of the money. So John Jacob Astor had beaver blood all over his hands, so he would have not been allowed into New York society. But yes, Caroline Astor sets about this sort of redefining what American society is. And you're right, you have to be 3 generations removed. So like Commodore Vanderbilt, again, was the uncouth guy who made all the money in shipping and then railroads. His child couldn't be in New York society. It was his grandchildren, the grandchildren after that.
Commodore, he of the pork chops, right?
Yes, they were a lot of big pork chops back then.
As you study your own family and write about more families that had family names that stood as strong as the buildings and monuments that their names were etched on, and then you realize the fall and the failures.
Yeah.
What's the common thread, the conclusion that you have come to yourself that you can relate to all of these falls?
You know, the Vanderbilts built all these huge palaces. Within 60 years, most of them were torn down because the tax laws changed. They were so top-heavy to actually operate. You needed a staff of 30 or 40 people. And so, if you have money, don't build giant palaces to yourself. And if you think it's going to last forever, you should read these books because it's not going to last forever.
And now, what will you say to your own children? Because you come from a family of privilege. You were told at a very early. Were you thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same question because this is what he's saying.
No, I'm fascinated by this topic. I mean, I grew up. My mom was Gloria Vanderbilt. She inherited money when she turned 21.
But you knew at an early age you weren't getting that.
Yeah, my mom spent all that money very effectively.
And you wanted to work from
very fast.
You wanted to make your own money.
I knew early on. I looked at my mom's family, the little I knew of the Vanderbilts. I looked at my dad's Mississippi upbringing on a farm during the Depression. And I, at an early age, knowing that there was no inheritance, I looked at my dad's family and thought, this is the model I'm going to follow. I'm a Cooper. I'm going to follow this model of like working really hard. I felt like no good could come of focusing on the fantasy of this Vanderbilt thing.
But now with your 2 sons, Anderson, what will you teach them? Are you thinking?
I want them to be their own people, and I wrote Vanderbilt because I wanted them to know.
There's you and Ben and White and Sebastian.
I wanted them to see the Vanderbilts as I sort of see them and understand why there isn't this pot of gold, and the importance of figuring out your own way and the importance of being your own person.
Anderson Cooper, we love when you're here. I especially love that you're here because you're my mentor, and I have a career in news because of you. And so anytime I get to sit next to you.
And now you followed me into fatherhood, which I love.
Yes.
Best-selling author Dhonielle Clayton is making the literary world more diverse. Last year, her novel, The Marvelers, the first in her Controversy series, spent 10 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Now she's releasing the second book in her series, The Memory Thieves. It follows Ella, a young girl who is the first in her community to attend an international magic school. Dhonielle, thank you so much for being here. This is the book, and the cover alone, I'm going to let them get a little close-up here,
Right.
gave me the warm and fuzzies, because we're starting to see more and more kids of color on the covers of, young children's books. But to see this black girl with braids on the cover as the protagonist, just, it filled me in a way. It kind of surprised me that I was, had this reaction. You've said that you wrote this book to your younger self. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. But I wanted to really sort of make a love letter to my young reader self. I was a bookworm, but I never got to see people who look like me, people who look like my family.
Oh, look at the photos.
Right? And I feel like it stunted my imagination. I didn't become a writer until much later in life. And I thought maybe if I could see myself, I could write myself into magical universes. So I wanted to make sure the next generation of readers didn't have that issue.
So talk to us about the emphasis on diversity, how diverse the book is, the research it took to make it that way.
Absolutely. Well, it takes place in a magic school in the sky that travels all over the world that every kid can have an invitation to. And so I wanted to make sure that my students, I used to be a teacher and librarian in East Harlem, New York, that they could see themselves, their families, and their communities reflected. And so my students came from all over the world. That's New York. That's New York City.
That's right.
And there wasn't a magic school that had an invitation for them, that had a place for them. And I wanted to make sure that they were asking me for these kinds of books, that they could go to a school like this, and there would be space for them. And I grew up in a family full of travelers, a military family, and so I was traveling early. So I was very lucky to be able to meet people from all over the world, and I wanted to reflect that in the world of the controverse and marvelers.
Yeah.
So, as we've pointed out, you include in your books stories. You don't stay away from discrimination. You don't stay away from prejudice and racism. But have seen across the country there have been movements to ban books. That's happened in a number of states. How do you feel when you see a book that you've written to help children? Adults say to you, hey, we don't want to expose our children to this kind of literature?
It's frustrating. It's upsetting. It's erasure. It's censure. It's like you don't want people that look like me or look like my students to exist and to be in environments and fictional environments that are exciting. But we also have to be able to tell the truth. And book banning is suppressing the truth.
Yeah.
And because it wants to create one narrative. And this book gets into that, but through the lens of fantasy, which is a great metaphor to discuss real world topics that adults don't really want to talk about. Well, it's fantasy. So is it real or is it not real? So I like to use that as a vehicle. And I always ask adults sort of, what are you afraid of? It's time for us to talk about real stuff. The young people already know. They see it.
So you purposely tried to draw that parallel between one of the major storylines, which is keeping secrets and lying about history, rewriting history. That was something you purposely did in this book.
Absolutely. And it came out of a conversation I was having with my parents about how they integrated schools in the South. My dad's from Mississippi, my mom's from North Carolina, and how it was a fractured conversation. And there were so many lies told about it. And I wanted to talk about that, but use a magical analog metaphor to be able to really talk about it so we can say, well, is it real or is it not real? And so I did all of that on purpose because young people are seeing censorship. They're seeing the bans. They're seeing that adults don't want to have real conversations.
Right.
But if we use fantasy, it's a way to have a real
It's a
conversation.
vehicle to get there.
Well, yeah, because Dhonielle, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is I look at that picture of you as a little girl, and I wondered to myself, I wasn't into fantasy books as a young man. I read tons, but I didn't see myself represented in that world, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, those types of books. And so what would that little girl have thought if she pulled up a book like The Memory Thieves, like your younger self?
She would have been obsessed. I would have read this book probably 100 times. It would have been falling apart. I would have been annoying my mother about, I need a new copy. And that was the issue, is that I felt like young people, especially people of color, weren't being fed.
Yeah.
And it means that we don't become writers. We don't know that we can write. We don't know that this is a career path.
Right.
And so I wanted to provide that yes, you can use your imagination. I had this conversation with a lot of friends. One of my good friends, Jason Reynolds, he said that he felt like when he was a young person that his imagination was taken from him. So he didn't read fantasy either.
Well, now so many
there's
young
this.
people and adults are going to be reading this fantasy. Thank you so
That's
much,
right.
Dhonielle.
Philanthropist, businesswoman, and advocate Melinda French Gates is here in New York this morning. Why? For the annual Goalkeepers event, which brings together leaders to address the world's most pressing challenges. So listen to this number. Every day, an estimated 800 women around the world die from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. That's about one death every 2 minutes. 2 minutes. This year's Goalkeepers report focuses on life-saving innovations that could save an estimated 2 million mothers and babies by 2030. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is committing $370 million a year from 2023 to 2027 to support maternal and children's health. Melinda French Gates, who is co-chair of the foundation, is with us exclusively on CBS Mornings. Good morning to you,
Hi.
Grandma. We'll talk about that in just a second.
Thanks for having me.
But I think the number is astounding, Melinda. When we think about this segment alone, by the time this segment is over, so many more women will have died. And they just don't have to. And that's one of the reasons why you were here to discuss.
Definitely.
What's your message?
My message is that these are needless deaths. I mean, this is an ancient problem. Women giving birth should not die in birth these days. By the time we're finished with this segment, 2 more women will have died. So it's as if you and I are gone and these guys are still sitting here.
But you say preventable, why and how?
They're preventable because we know what to do. And we are coming up with new interventions, and we can talk about some of those. But these are deaths that, if we did the right thing when a woman is starting to bleed to death, if we did the right thing of giving her IV iron so she doesn't have anemia, these are women who don't need to die. And guess what? If a woman dies, it reduces the chance that her child will survive. In fact, the child's chances of surviving then are only 37%.
Did
That's
becoming
tragic.
a grandmother yourself change your perception? Listen, you were always compassionate.
I'm sure you're
about
already
this.
into this, but
Yes.
seeing your
Yeah.
own child
Yes.
become a mother must focus it in a new way.
Definitely. We've always been working on this as a foundation, but I think we've renewed our efforts. Being in that delivery room with my daughter and her husband,
You were in the delivery
I
room?
was in the delivery room, and you see the intense times, and I remember the intense times for me when I'm giving birth. And there's a lot of downtime where I could think about other places I'd been in the world in the delivery room where moms weren't going to survive, but my daughter was likely to survive.
Yeah, speaking of that, in your report, you note that Black and Indigenous women died 3 times the rate of white women. What was your reaction to finding that out?
I was shocked. And when I first learned that was only about 5 or 6 years ago when Serena Williams wrote her essay after the birth of her first daughter. I was shocked that here is this person who is one of the top athletes in the world, and she's not listened to in our own healthcare system, and we almost lost her.
And she's
That's
Serena Williams and all that comes
Exactly
with
So think
that.
about the women without those resources.
Exactly, and those are the women that we lose in our country. It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. So let's talk about how we make it not, right? With $370 million per year for 4 years, that's the commitment. How is that money going to be spent? Where do you think you'll see the biggest impact?
Well, we're coming up with new interventions that can save lives. We're working on getting the data to understand exactly where women die in the health system in the United States and around the world. And then we're advocating for policy changes that make a difference for women.
You also recently announced, I was really glad to see it, because last time we talked, you said, listen, I will stay on the foundation for 2 years. We'll see how it goes. Because we all know about the divorce with you and Bill Gates. You said, we'll see how our joint leadership goes, and then we'll each make a decision. You made the decision that you are staying on, so I'm thinking it's going well. So what went into making the decision that you will continue? Because this was your baby, too.
I'm a co-chair of the
Yes.
foundation. I'm a founder of our foundation. I care deeply in the things we're talking about today, moms and babies. So there's no reason for me to leave my post of an institution I created and that I'm advocating for. I'm meeting with presidents and world leaders while we're here in New York this week because I want lives to be saved, and this is the way to do it.
Speaking of saving lives, and since you just referenced it, this is not a new CD Walkman. That you
Yes. No, it's not.
Our new charger we have on CBS Mornings deal.
Yes. So there are both interventions that exist today, like azithromycin, something we all use, but you can use that during pregnancy for mom. It'll save her life. But another new intervention we've come up with is an AI ultrasound that's being developed that, especially in these low-income countries, you could put it in a nurse or midwife's hands, a few swipes across a woman's belly, and they get the statistics of, is this child going to be in trouble? Is this child not gaining enough weight so you can intervene? These are new low-cost interventions we can get out into healthcare workers' hands to save lives.
Not a special phone, just a regular old phone.
Regular phone
Incredible.
with a little handheld device, not a big machine like you see where we go in the United States for an ultrasound. This will save lives.
Yeah. Regardless of what we accomplish, sometimes I feel like we are looked at by the fruit that we bear. And I want to bring up your daughters, Jen and Phoebe. It seems like they're following in your footsteps.
Yeah.
So it seems like your life work has made a profound impact on your kids. How does that make you feel?
Fantastic. I have 3 children that I am so proud of. They're all in their 20s. They've spent a lot of time outside of our own country. They see the disparities in the world. And so to have one be a global advocate for women's reproductive rights and another who's in medical school, it makes me feel great as a mom.
You know what makes me feel great is seeing you. You are strong, you are proud. We just saw you on, they reference you on Billions as Melinda beep Gates in a very positive way to say you're a badass, basically. So life is good for you, Melinda, right?
Life is great,
You
and
are
I want to
happy?
make it better for other
Yes.
moms.
There you
And
go.
you are happy.
Melinda French Gates, thank you so
Yes,
much for
yes,
joining
yes.
us.
Thank you for having me.
We are here now with Oprah, as in Winfrey, because there's only one. We are so excited. Why? Because she's here to reveal her newest book club selection. So drum roll, please.
Drum roll.
And it is
Wellness.
by who?
Nathan Hill.
Hello, Nathan Hill. So wellness follows the relationship of Elizabeth and Jack over the course of their 20-year relationship, from their meetings as lonely students in Chicago back in 1993 to their struggling marriage, and they were on the struggle bus in 2014, big time. This is Hill's second novel. You remember following his best-selling book, The Knicks. That was way back in 2016, but it was named one of the best books at that time. We are very excited to have best-selling author Nathan Hill, and of course, Oprah is always welcome. Good to see you both. Nathan, you were just telling us before we went on that that's the first time you've seen the book with the sticker on it.
Yeah, this morning was the first time I've seen this.
Yes.
This book club sticker,
Doesn't
which
it
has been
look
around
nice?
since
It
1996.
looks very nice. I always like to hear the moment of when you found out. I know, how did it work for you?
Oprah crashed a Zoom call. I was having what I thought was just going to be a normal meeting with my publisher, and then my screen was taken over by Oprah. And the strangest thing happened. Like, I'm very accustomed to seeing Oprah on a screen. So my impulse was just to kind of sit back and listen and learn, be entertained.
Yes.
You know? And it took, I think, an awkward amount of time to realize that she was actually speaking to me. And, like, I had to speak back. It was a very surreal moment.
That's your story of hearing from her, but how did you come to Nathan? How did you come to this book? Why'd you pick it?
Well, Lee Newman, who sends me books from the Oprah Daily team on a regular basis, I have stacks and stacks of them, sent this to me, and we started talking about why this would work. I mean, it's basically a love story gone wrong. I loved it because it was set in Wicker Park. In
Which you know
Chicago.
well.
Yes, Chicago area. And so it felt, at the beginning, very familiar to me, and then Jack and Elizabeth became less and less familiar to me. But I really appreciated your ability to take language and draw us into the story in such a way, in such a modern, contemporary, vibrant way.
Yeah. Nathan, this inspiration for the book is based on a short story that you wrote a long time, decades ago.
Yeah.
But when you revisited it, it kind of spoke to you differently.
It did, yeah. The first chapter is a short story that I wrote almost 20 years ago now. I had just moved to New York City. I was living in this tiny studio apartment in Queens. I had nothing but like a mattress on the floor, and my window looked out to this wall of other windows into other apartment buildings, and I imagine this scene where two lonely people were glimpsing each other through those windows and slowly falling in love. And I wrote that as a short story, and I thought it was fabulously romantic. And then fast forward, 15, 20 years, and I'm older. I've been happily married for many years, and I think back to that couple, and I thought, well, maybe they're romantic, but they're also really naive. They're maybe kind of idiots, like projecting these fantasies onto the other people without even knowing them. And it made me wonder what would have become of these people, if we tracked them, if they got together, if they got married, if they became parents, what would happen to them? So I started writing.
Don't you love the novelist moment?
Yes, I do. But I love that because, when they're both sort of semi-stalking each other, but it wasn't a creepy way. It was very fascinating to me when they first met. The line that Jack said to Elizabeth was what, Oprah? Because
Come with.
He just walked up to her and just said, "Come with."
Come with.
I love that line so much.
Thank you. I wanted his
Come
first
with.
words to be completely without guile, just completely pure, just come with. And it's also an invitation to the reader. This is a bit of a long book, and I'm kind of asking the reader to come with me for it.
And let me say this to all you men out there that are looking at Gayle and want to shoot your shot, just say come with. She gonna fall right into your arms.
Nate, I'm trying to find somebody I can go up to and say, "Come with." I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding because I think it's so sweet and so genuine. That's what I like. Yeah. This book also raises a question, Oprah, about what love really is. Didn't that resonate with you in terms of?
And what resonated is that each of them trying to find their own way, and even the coupling and with the other couples, and it's it's a marriage trying to find its space, and I think a lot of people go through that, and I think a lot of readers are going to appreciate the way you wrote Jack and Elizabeth. I mean, I think about, what are they doing now? How are they doing?
You also, Oprah, were fascinated with algorithms because we know what the world we live in today.
Yes. And we wanted to know, is all that true?
There's a section in the book that's essentially told from the point of view of algorithms, of like Facebook or social media algorithms. The book is really about the stories that come to define us, how our worlds can be built by the stories that we believe in. And I had the depressing experience of like losing people to Facebook rabbit holes and conspiracies, and what better kind of example of losing yourself in a story than that. So yeah.
Losing them how though? Because they would just believe the crazy stuff.
They went down the rabbit hole.
And they became completely different people. That you knew.
From the people that I thought they were, exactly. Right. And so I read, oh my goodness, I read hundreds of pages of like Facebook patent applications. So
you did some serious research for this.
I did, yeah.
Art, psychology.
Brain-meltingly dry documents.
But it helped.
I mean, it's amazing that you have a whole bibliography section, which is not typical for fiction. But Oprah, I mean, because it is, you can learn a lot from this book. You recently wrote a book last time you were on talking about happiness.
Yes.
The book is called Wellness.
Yes.
Did you learn anything more in your search for happiness from this book?
Well, what I learned is that when you're sitting with a good book and you're absorbed and you are allowed to be transported to another way of being and other people's experiences, that for me, that's the best kind of relaxation and comfort. And so spending time with Jack and Elizabeth, I was good to know them through a novel.
Yes.
That's a little tease about what kind of people they are.
And what do you hope that people will take away from the book for you?
Everybody believes, you know, stories about themselves. They believe stories about the people in their lives, about the world. And because we're fallible, some of those stories are going to need amendments, and some of those stories are going to be wrong. And so believe what you believe, he says, but believe lightly, believe with curiosity, believe with humility. I think that's kind of at the heart of the book.
Wow. Well, I predict you have a second bestseller on your hands.
I predict so too.
What do you say, Oprah?
I certainly say so. Nathan Hill.
Yes, thank you both.
This morning, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and BET co-founder Sheila Johnson is with us. She and her husband, Robert Johnson, launched the Black Entertainment Television Network in 1980. When they sold the company for nearly $3 billion in 2000, Johnson became the nation's first African-American female billionaire. She is now the CEO of Salamander Hotels and Resorts and the co-owner of 3 professional sports teams in our nation's capital. Johnson writes about the hardships in her marriage and hurdles she overcame as a Black businesswoman in her new book, Walk Through Fire, a memoir of love, loss, and triumph. It's published by Simon & Schuster, a division of our parent company, Paramount Global, which also owns BET. Sheila Johnson joins us right now. Good morning. How are you doing?
I am doing great, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're glad to have
here,
you.
Sheila.
So why did you decide to write this book right now?
I have been on a journey of trying to find myself. And to write this book has been therapy, and it's really helping me to heal. I've been through a lot. I've been suffering from post-traumatic stress. It's been a tough journey.
So it serves as therapy for you.
Absolutely.
What did you find out about yourself after digging deep in writing?
That I'm stronger than I thought. I've been through 3 acts in my life. First as a concert violinist, then as a co-founder of Black Entertainment Television, where during that time I was really erased out of that. And there was so much that I was doing on the back end. You know, and I did a show called Teen Summit.
I remember.
I sold my
One of the best
violin.
things on BET.
No doubt.
Yes,
In a
thank
time where they
you.
desperately needed it.
Yeah, and it needs to come back. It really does need to come back. And everything that I tried to do, especially during BET, I really wanted to promote my husband, to make him shine. And I was the cheerleader behind that, and really trying to support him. And even we had tough times even getting the station started. I sold my prize violin to raise some money to pay the rent on our first, offices. There was a lot of sacrifice, and I continued to work all through that period for hours and hours, teaching the violin, running back and forth to Amman, Jordan, performing, and just trying to keep a roof over our heads.
Yeah.
But it's important for people to understand your backstory too, Sheila, because you open the story with your mom collapsing in the kitchen. She
Absolutely.
had what appears to be a breakdown after your dad said he was leaving the family, he had met another woman.
Yes.
And in that moment when you're cradling your mother in the kitchen, you said, I'm never gonna be like this, dependent upon a man for my financial security, for my physical security, for my mental security. And then you ended up doing the exactly
Same thing. And I think these are the lessons we learn in life. Things that happen early in your life, they do come back around, and you have to watch this carefully. Fortunately or unfortunately, that happened when I was 16 years old. I had to grow up really quickly and just trying to support my mother and my little brother and then trying to get into college. I knew nothing about SAT preps, nothing. And this is when you're in a community, social economic status where you don't know these things.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize, especially in the African American community, we're not told that you have to do an SAT prep. We didn't have the money. My mother didn't have the money. And back then, women had very little rights.
But as you go back, you said you wrote it for your healing. What did you discover about yourself about why you stayed with a man who you write in the book left you on your wedding night, who was soon to be with another woman, who constantly, while may not have been physically abusive, he was certainly very emotionally and verbally abusive to you, who was involved with women who worked with him at BET, and that was revealed to you.
Yes.
And why, in a very, very painful way. You know, and so you're married to a man who's a cheater, pumpkin eater throughout, seemingly from the very beginning of your...
Absolutely.
According to you.
Yes.
We reached out to him. He has no comment about this book, we should say. So this is your story. What did you learn about yourself about why you stayed in the way that you stayed? And you were just as influential at BET, too.
Exactly.
You put up your own money. You worked with him side by side with this organization.
I think as people read the book, I saw myself as a failure, either from his emotional abuse and telling me I was a failure. I wasn't worth anything.
You believed him?
At the time, I was young enough, and I really did believe him because I put him up on a pedestal. I really did. And I thought that everything he said was right. And I had to keep fighting through that. And that's what upset me more than anything. But what I've also learned in all of this at the end, and I tell this to many young girls, do not get involved in a relationship until you know who you are. I didn't know who I was. You know, I was planning my life as I was going along. I thought I knew was in the arts. The arts kept me grounded, and as a violinist. And performing.
Who are you today? You say you know who you are. Who are you? A philanthropist? You've transformed Middleburg, Virginia.
Yes.
Who are you today, Sheila Johnson?
I'm a very powerful entrepreneur.
Yes, you are. In the words of Gayle King, a badass, as she likes to say. Sheila Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. I wish we had more time. Please come back.
Yes.
Joe, good morning. It's so great to have you here. First of all, you're like the greatest living sports writer. You've been Sports Writer of the Year by like 5 different organizations, and you're such a gift to the game of baseball because although you've covered all sports in your career, you do such a lovely, beautiful job bringing the magic back into baseball. And all these moments I feel like I knew, and then I start reading them, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know this at all. And it's funny. It's so funny at the same time.
Yeah.
What was the idea? How did you get into this?
Well, this was the first one that I wrote that I knew the title. I knew I was going to write a book called Why We Love Baseball, and I was trying to figure out exactly what it is. But, I mean, it's so great to hear you say that because that's what I believe about the game, you know, that it is funny and it's touching and it's you know, everybody knows about the poetry of baseball, but there's also this other side of baseball that is just wild and interesting. And I wanted to try to capture all of it. And, you know, I started off by asking people why they love baseball, and it was so interesting to hear people tell because it's so many. Everybody has a story, and their stories are all different. It's you never hear the same thing twice.
So you've got things here that'll make you laugh, make you cry, things that are inspirational. I mean, what I love about baseball personally is actually the baseball players. They're funny. They are good storytellers. There's a lot of downtime. So one moment in particular, José Canseco, people will remember this. Takes a fly ball off the noggin.
Off the head.
Off the head. It bounces over the fence. I think it's the only known home run off the head in the history of baseball. And afterwards, a sports writer asked Julio Franco, his teammate, have you ever seen anything like that? What's Franco say?
He says, yeah, in the cartoon.
In cartoons,
The cartoon. I have a friend who I do my podcast with, Mike Schur, who is the creator of Parks and Recreation, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and so many other shows. And he told me when I started, if José Canseco is not number 1, the whole book is invalid. Like, he was convinced that had to be the number 1 moment.
Something else that people in the New York area in particular remember, Mr. October, the great Reggie Jackson. You think, oh, that's because he was having a wonderful playoff season, right? What's the real story behind that?
So funny. The real story is that he was having a terrible playoffs, terrible, and he went to, and complained about something, and they went to Thurman Munson and said, what do you think about him complaining about all this?
Great Yankees catcher.
Yeah, great Yankee catcher. What do you think about him complaining? And he's like, Well, you know, the guy's Mr. October.
Yeah, we got to
What are you
listen to
gonna
him.
do?
Yeah, he's complaining about a pitching decision or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's like 2 for $1 million in
Right.
the playoffs at that point. And got to listen to him on
Gotta
the
listen-
pitching, right?
Mr. October over
here.
here,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it sticks. I just love that. It's fantastic. One of the inspirational stories where I'm like, actually, like I think about this almost every day now. Don Larson.
Yes.
Perfect game in the World Series, right?
In the World Series.
In the World Series. Don Larson, the man, so far from perfect.
Yes.
Tell me about him.
Well, so Don Larson was a very famously wild guy. I mean, Mickey Mantle called him the greatest drinker he'd ever seen.
And Mickey Mantle could drink.
Mickey Mantle knew his drinkers, yeah. And he didn't even know that he was going to start that game. Like, you know, so he was out the night before. There's many, many mysteries about what happened the night before. But then he was talking to a friend of his, and he says, you know what? I think I'm going to throw a no-hitter tomorrow. And his friend's like, you know, a 1-hitter or 2-hitter would be fine. And he's like, no, I think I'm going to throw a no-hitter tomorrow. And he went out, and it was not only the first perfect game in the World Series ever, and still the only perfect game. It was the first perfect game anybody had thrown at any point in decades. It's wild.
It's amazing. And you dig out of the archives of the Daily News, then the biggest newspaper in America, the opening line to the next day's sports story. The imperfect man pitched a perfect game.
Yes.
I love that.
One of
I
the
also
greatest.
love, and this is why it's so inspirational, Don Larson represented this deeply hopeful notion that any of us, no matter how flawed, can wake up one morning, find the ball in our shoe, and be perfect.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
You deserve a plaque in Cooperstown. Joe Posnanski, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We love our series Changing the Game and highlights extraordinary women who are making a difference. And at just 8 years old, not 18, Maya Penn started her clothing and accessory company. It's called Maya's Ideas, and it uses eco-friendly materials. She gave a TED Talk for the first time when she was just 13. At 16, her book, You Got This, was published by Simon & Schuster, a proud part of our parent company. And Maya Penn joins us now. Maya, thank you very much for being here. That's a lot to have done by the age of 23. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, geez, where to even begin? How has this company, Maya's Ideas, evolved since you were 8?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. I started Maya's Ideas when I was 8 years old because I've always been very passionate about the natural world and environmental science. I grew up a very, very nerdy kid, but also a very artsy one. I loved all things art and design, including fashion design. And I was doing my own research and realized that there was a need for more sustainable fashion in the world. And so, since I started that company, it's evolved into a global sustainable fashion brand with celebrity clientele. And now I'm also a sustainability consultant as well. So I consult with Fortune 500 companies, startups, and everything in between on ESG, corporate social responsibility, and just, how we can make a more sustainable and, equitable world.
What does ESG stand for?
Environmental social governance.
Okay.
Yes.
It's one thing to describe yourself as nerdy growing up or to be a creative. It's another thing to have people in your family that will lean into that.
Yeah.
And your mom is here with you today.
Yes.
And I would like to ask how she has inspired you, but what has her support meant to you while you have been on this journey?
I mean, it's meant the world to me because, not every parent, when their 8-year-old kid comes up to them and is like, oh, I want to start an eco-friendly fashion company. Not every parent's going to be like, okay, sure. Like, what do you need to do to figure that out and find out how to do that? I'm really grateful and feel very blessed that my parents are, equally, very passionate about giving back and about sustainability. My mom, when she was young, her mom, my grandmother, they planted an organic garden together, and she's, they've always been, environmental stewards, and so I had those same experiences growing up. And then my dad, when he was a teenager, he was creating solar energy projects.
Oh, wow, okay.
Getting for science fairs and getting awards from NASA for them.
This is
so
a legacy.
It made sense that I would then have that passion and run with it.
Maya, quickly, because we're almost out of time, there's so many climate events going on here in New York City this week. You're taking part. What is your view on your generation, identifying as the last one that can really create change?
Yes, I mean, Generation Z is so outspoken because we do have this this feeling. I'm really passionate about intergenerational collaboration. I think everyone has something amazing to bring to the table in this fight. I was just a part of the huge climate march that happened, starting this week, and 75,000 people showed up. And I think that we're, on the cusp of seeing that this is a issue that affects everyone,
Yeah.
and that everyone's voice matters, and that you belong in this space.
That's right. You say your generation is the last one with a real shot to turn things around, and you are leading the way. In my opinion, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate
Thank you so much
Yeah, we
for
do
having
really
me.
appreciate it. It's because of work that you're doing for that next generation that your next generation, which
There we go. Full circle,
is going to have a big, beautiful world to live in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maya, then, for all that you're doing.
Max Greenfield is here first on CBS Mornings. Max, good morning to you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
Allowed is a very weird word once
Yes.
you read it over and over and over again. And
Especially
the main
when you say it aloud.
Yeah, aloud.
We addressed that in the book. I'm like, why are we not just saying out loud?
Yes, 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 yes.
And the main character here wants to be a silent, as you put it.
Yes, that's right.
It's a great book. It'll be wonderful for parents to read aloud.
Yes.
What made you want to write it? What was the inspiration?
This is the third in the series of these type of books. The first one was called I Don't Want to Read This Book Aloud, and it was for reluctant readers, and it was all the reasons why you might not want to read a book aloud, and by the end of that book, you've read the book aloud. The second book was This Book Is Not a Present. It's for kids who, don't enjoy opening up a gift and realizing it's a book.
It's a book, yeah.
And it's really for kids who learn in different ways, who are active learners, who rather get an electric guitar or a skateboard. And then this one was, and we'd always talked about doing this book, it's, trying to tackle the idea of being scared to read aloud, which I think not only
Is that talking
kids,
about you?
It's, yes.
Was it talking about
of
you?
course it's talking
But
about
how
me.
could that be? I mean,
Yes.
you're a professional
I know.
actor. I mean,
Well,
your whole job is like reading at auditions and,
Well,
scripts.
the book sort of addresses all the fears that you might have while reading aloud and allows you to sort of voice those, or allows a teacher or a parent or a librarian to voice those, to sort of take that away. But I've experienced probably every one of those multiple times, and now I'm numb to them all.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to do table reads for New Girl, and I mean, I'll tell the story. Jake will probably get mad at me, but Jake and
Who's Jake?
Jake would play Nick on the show, Jake Johnson. And we would get the scripts very late. It was like right before the table reads. And we would just skim through them for words that we were afraid that we would mispronounce in front of everyone. So it'd be like this, and he'd be like, oh, you got some big words today. You were gonna mess up in front
It's
of everyone.
nerve-wracking. It is.
Yes, it's nerve-wracking.
And this is a children's book, but adults deal with it too.
Yeah,
you hear that you have to give a presentation in front of your peers.
Yes.
You find yourself caught in this place where you have self-doubt.
Yes,
I
totally.
think, don't you guys think it's easier to read or do something in front of a group of strangers than people that know you?
100%.
Don't you
Yeah.
think it's much easier
Yes.
to me to talk
Yeah.
to a group of strangers who don't know you?
But even
as
still
opposed to people that
reading,
know you?
and you guys are off prompter a lot, and it's tricky. It's a real skill, and it's different from just reading straight, which is also a skill. We addressed that in the first book, but it's like reading is a skill, and it's not easy for everybody. And then on top of that, you put this whole other element of reading aloud to people, and especially you put that, in the hands of a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid.
Well,
these poor children.
yes.
Yeah.
What are we putting them
Talk about poor children, poor adults. This is the first children's book where I've seen the word aplomb in a children's book.
Well, I like that word a lot because, one, there's many different ways to pronounce
Yes,
it.
yes,
Aplomb. I'm not really sure what the correct pronunciation is, and what we talk about in the book is like what happens when you run into a word like that and
you
you
don't
go, and you often stop and just go, I don't know what to do at this point. I'm going to say it wrong, and everybody's going to make fun of me, and why is everybody staring at me, and I don't know what to do
You start
now.
sweating, and then it's your
Max,
worst nightmare.
I'm staring. Are those Taylor Swift bracelets that you're wearing?
Big time.
Honestly.
Well, this one
They
time.
look like Taylor Swift bracelets.
This one's our song, and the other one's one that my son made. It's just his name.
Did you
That's
go
not
to
a-
the
that's
Taylor
not a
Swift
song.
concert? Did you
I
go?
did.
Because I'm thinking those look like those friendship bracelets.
So you're a Swiftie. Or you're a Swiftie by association because your daughter
Of your daughter.
Well, she initially got me in, and now I'm like the annoying nerd dad who's like this. I think we got the best surprise songs because. And she's like, "Can you not talk about this?"
Oh, well, the book is great. It's your third. Are you going to have a fourth? Is that in the works?
Yes.
Wow.
We are working on a fourth. It's a different book than I think this is the final in the series
run its
of reading
course.
Dedicated to your wife, Tess. I like that.
Yes, this is dedicated
Called
to
it-
my wife, Tess, who just missed you at Beyonce.
Oh,
She was
yeah.
very
we,
sad.
We had a good time.
I go, have you seen
Greenfield.
Gayle?
And the book is
Bravo,
meant to be
Max
read aloud.
Greenfield.
Max Greenfield, thank you very much.